The silent man in uniform, the marble floors of the Grand Eastern Royal Embassy echoed beneath finely polished shoes. Diplomats moved like whispers through the wide halls, files clutched under their arms, voices hushed and measured. The morning sun flooded through tall windows, casting golden light on ancient tapestries and flags that told the stories of nations. But no presence in that embassy was more commanding, more quietly formidable than the royal guard who stood. At the front gate, Sergeant Haroun Malik, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the deep indigo uniform of the Queen's Honor Corps, didn't speak unless necessary. His eyes were watchful but never restless. For 15 years, he had guarded the gates of the Royal Eastern Embassy, never once stepping out of line, never late, never faltering. He was the face of duty. And everyone in the embassy from junior clerks to visiting ambassadors respected him, even feared him slightly. It wasn't his size or the weapon at his side. It was his stillness, a kind of immovable presence that told you, somehow, that this man could not be bought, bribed, or broken. But on a quiet Tuesday morning, Haroun Malik's unshakable world was about to be challenged by nothing less than an order. The arrival began with the arrival of a foreign official, a newly appointed special envoy from the Northern Union. His name, Jonathan Kane, a sharp dresser, clean-cut, mid-40s. His resume included successful peace negotiations in war-torn territories and trade agreements that brought billions in aid to starving nations. But those who worked under him whispered something else. "He's hard," one embassy staffer muttered. "Unforgiving," said another. "No respect for traditions," a third added quietly. Kane didn't walk into the Eastern Embassy. He strode as if the ground owed him passage. "Where's security?" Kane asked bluntly as he approached the front gate. Haroun didn't answer. He stood tall and still, hands behind his back, eyes focused ahead. He recognized Kane but didn't salute. Kane wasn't royalty. And the royal guard saluted only two things, the flag and the Queen. Kane halted. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "You're standing in front of a foreign diplomat. Why don't you salute me?" Silence, not defiance, not arrogance, just the same stillness. Kane narrowed his eyes. "I'm speaking to you, soldier." "I am not a soldier," Haroun said quietly, still not looking directly at him. "I am the Queen's guard." Kane stepped closer. "And I am a guest of your Queen. When I walk in, you will salute. That's an order." The air went still. Even birds perched on the embassy's grand ledges seemed to pause. Haroun slowly turned his head. His eyes met Kane's for the first time, and he shook his head. Tensions. Word of the exchange spread quickly through the embassy. Staff who had never heard Haroun speak found themselves whispering about him. He refused a direct order? But why? Isn't that insubordination? Can't he be fired for that? But those who had worked there longer only smiled quietly. "No," said old Ambassador Qasim. He wasn't being disrespectful. He was being honorable. Still, Kane didn't let it go. He lodged a formal complaint. He demanded disciplinary action. And then, he made a call that would turn the embassy upside down. He requested a ceremony, a small event, just for visiting foreign diplomats to celebrate unity and protocol. And during that ceremony, he announced he wanted a royal guard to publicly salute him in front of everyone. "I want it written into the ceremony," he told the planners. "The guard will recognize the envoy, a moment of protocol. Just 10 seconds. But everyone knew what it really was. A show of power, a public bending of the knee. A guard's code. Haroun Malik didn't argue. He didn't write letters. He didn't plead. He simply continued his duty. Every day at the gate. Rain or sun. Every morning. Standing at perfect attention. But his face had changed. He wasn't afraid, but he was quietly wounded. Because for him, this wasn't just about protocol. It was about identity. The guard's creed. An oath whispered by every man and woman who ever donned that deep indigo uniform was clear. We bow to no man. We salute no office. We protect the realm and its people. We serve not pride, but principle. And if Haroun broke that, even once, even to avoid punishment, he would no longer be the man he had built himself into. A memory in the rain, that night. Rain tapped softly against the guards' quarters. Haroun sat by a window, his uniform folded neatly beside him. In his hand, an old photograph faded and frayed. It showed a little boy in rags, clutching the leg of a young soldier. The soldier was Haroun, barely 20. The boy was a street orphan from the border slums, an orphan whose mother had been caught in a protest crackdown. Haroun hadn't turned him in. He had fed him, protected him, snuck him across the city to a safe house, even when it could have cost him his commission. You'll never be anyone if you keep choosing kindness. An older guard had warned him back then, but Haroun didn't believe that. He believed something else. True power isn't how many obey you. It's how many you protect. The day of the ceremony, the great hall was dressed in banners. Cameras were set up. Diplomats from 7 nations filled the velvet rows. A string quartet played softly in the background. At the center stood Kane, resplendent in a crisp black suit. And at the entrance, just as ordered, stood Haroun Malik, in full dress uniform, sword at his side. A silence fell. A signal was given. It was time. Kane stepped forward. The crowd turned to face Haroun. Everyone waited. The cameras zoomed in, and then the unimaginable happened. Haroun didn't move. Not an inch. No salute. No bow. No change in expression. Just silence. Kane's jaw clenched. "Guard," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "You were ordered to salute." Haroun's voice was steady, calm, measured. "I do not salute men. I salute honor, and today I see none." The embassy erupts, gasps, whispers. The room shifted. Like a wave breaking on the rocks. Security officers stepped forward. Kane's aides looked panicked. The head of protocol looked like she might faint, but Haroun stood still. And Kane. He didn't speak again. He just turned and walked out of the hall. Aftermath: they tried to punish Haroun. They tried to strip him of his post. Papers were filed. Accusations were made. But before they could be signed, something unexpected happened. Letter arrived. It was handwritten, simple, signed by Her Royal Majesty, and it read, "A man who knows when not to salute is more dangerous than a man who salutes everything. Let him remain. He reminds us who we are." Legacy of the Silent Guard. Today, if you visit the Grand Eastern Embassy, you'll find a small plaque near the front gate. It doesn't bear Haroun's name. It doesn't tell a long story. It has only 8 words. Stillness is not weakness, it is resolve. And just beside it, in polished stone, a bronze figure of a guard standing straight, eyes forward, unsaluting. The Queen's quiet gambit. The days that followed the ceremony were unnaturally still inside the Grand Eastern Embassy. The vibrant halls that once rang with quiet diplomacy now carried the low tension of unspoken words. Staff walked lighter. Conversations halted when certain doors opened. Eyes lingered too long on uniformed shoulders. What should have been a simple diplomatic moment had instead become a symbol one neither side had expected. The man at the center of it all, Sergeant Haroun Malik, returned to duty as though nothing had happened. He stood at his usual post at the gates, iron-spined and blank-faced, just as he had done every day for 15 years. There were no shifts in his routine, no bitterness in his voice, and no trace of fear in his eyes. But behind his composed silence, a storm was building, because the embassy was no longer just an embassy. It had become a battlefield of principle versus power. Inside the diplomatic chambers, Envoy Jonathan Kane was not just angry, he was humiliated. His staff had been whispering. His home office had sent inquiries, and worst of all, footage from the ceremony had leaked online. Thousands had seen the Royal Guard stand defiant. Millions had watched the clip, their comments flooding with admiration and fury in equal measure. Some accused Haroun of arrogance. of undermining a guest nation's dignity, but far more applauded. Him as a man of immovable character. Hashtags spread rapidly. Hashtag the unsaluting guard. Hashtag honor before order. And hashtag stillness speaks. Cain had come to the embassy to build alliances. Instead, he had become a meme. The Queen had not publicly commented. But those closest to the royal administration knew what that meant. Silence from Her Majesty was never passive. It was the sound of thought, strategic, careful thought. And as the days passed, whispers began that a decision would soon come, not just for Cain or Haroun, but for the entire image of the monarchy and what it chose to stand behind in this new, uncertain century. Far from the public eye, in a quiet corner of the embassy's east wing, an elderly advisor named Lady Eleanor Marrow met with the Queen's private envoy. Lady Marrow had been with the crown for over 40 years and was one of the few who had seen the Queen in moments of private heartbreak and triumph. She reviewed transcripts of the incident, watched the footage, and finally set her tea aside with a sigh of recognition. "That guard," she said softly, "has just forced the crown to remember its spine." Haroun, however, knew none of this. He was not following the news, nor reading the swirling opinions on social platforms. His focus remained on what it always had been, guarding the gates, watching the faces that passed, and protecting the dignity of a position older than most nations represented inside those walls. But for the first time in years, his past had begun to weigh on him again, not because of guilt, but because he sensed that others now saw him as a symbol rather than a man. He remembered how he had first taken the oath, young and lean, wearing a second-hand uniform tailored to fit his broader frame. He had practiced his salutes in the mirror, rehearsed the Royal Guard's creed under his breath while waiting for assignments, and spent his early nights alone, without family, without the comfort of a familiar village, only with his boots, his discipline, and the small photograph of the child he had saved years before. That child had long since disappeared into the world. Haroun hadn't seen him since that day, but that face wide-eyed, smudged with soot still visited his dreams. Not as a memory, but as a question. Are you still the man who didn't turn me away? 3 days after the ceremony, Haroun was summoned to the Internal Review Council, an administrative committee formed to investigate breaches of diplomatic protocol. Though technically powerless to discipline him without royal approval, they had been authorized to question him formally. The session was held in a square room with glass-paneled walls and an air conditioner that hummed far too loud for comfort. Sitting across from him were 5 officials. 2 represented foreign relations. 1 was from internal security. The 4th was an advisor to the Deputy Minister of Protocol. And the 5th, to Haroun's slight surprise, was Lady Eleanor Marrow herself, acting as a neutral observer for the crown. They didn't waste time. "You understand, Sergeant," began one of the counselors, "that refusing to comply with a foreign envoy's instruction during an official ceremony is grounds for disciplinary review." Haroun nodded once. "I understand the concern." "Then you admit you disobeyed a lawful command?" "I did not disobey. I upheld the Royal Guard's code, which is binding to me before all diplomatic gestures." "You could have jeopardized months of negotiations." "With respect," Haroun interrupted, not harshly but firmly, "if a salute from a man who swore not to give one is what makes or breaks an alliance, then that alliance was never real to begin with." The room went quiet. It wasn't defiance. It was a deeply settled conviction, and it had the weight of truth. Lady Marrow watched him closely. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp with understanding. "What would you do if the Queen herself commanded you to salute Mr. Cain?" asked the advisor from Internal Security. Haroun did not hesitate. "I would ask Her Majesty if she truly meant it. And if she did, I would do so, because my oath is to her person and the realm. She embodies not the whims of her guests." Lady Marrow finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but crisp as winter air. Sergeant Malik, you speak as though the guard's role is not merely ceremonial. Haroun looked directly at her, a first for the entire session. It isn't, my lady. The guard is the last to fall. When the flag is pulled down and the streets are lost, we are the final presence of the crown, not in pageantry. In sacrifice, no one responded. Because there was nothing to say, that night, Lady Marrow wrote a letter. It bore no title, no greeting. Just a single statement. The man you seek to punish may be the only reason people still believe the monarchy has purpose. She sealed it with the royal crest and handed it to the Queen's courier without another word. A week later, Cain was recalled to his home country, not publicly punished, not officially rebuked, but repositioned quietly. His mission complete announcement was read in the press, with the usual praise and carefully worded diplomacy. But those inside the walls of the embassy knew the truth. Cain had lost a battle not of politics, but of respect. And in his place, a new envoy was assigned, Ambassador Imani Vos, a seasoned diplomat known for her fairness, emotional intelligence, and commitment to ethical leadership. Her first action upon entering the embassy was not a speech or a press conference. She simply walked to the front gate, paused in front of Haroun Malik, and said, "I don't need your salute, Sergeant, but I hope I can earn your respect." Haroun allowed himself a small nod. And just for a moment, only for a breath, his eyes softened. It was not the end of the story. Not yet. But for the first time in many days, there was peace in the embassy again. What no one saw, however, was the package that arrived at the guards' quarters the next morning. It was small, wrapped in rough paper, and bore no return address. Inside was a letter, and a photograph. The letter said, "You may not remember me, but I remember you. You saved me when I was a child. You carried me on your back and gave me my first clean water. I watched your ceremony online. I recognized you instantly. You didn't salute that man. You saluted the boy I used to be. Thank you, Guardian." Haroun sat on the edge of his cot, the photograph trembling in his hand. It was the boy again, but older now, grown, wearing a worn mechanic's jacket, grease on his fingers, standing proudly beside a modest shop with a sign that read, "Liberty Motors." Haroun said nothing, but the smallest smile cracked the edge of his lips. The world may have judged him, misunderstood him, even threatened to punish him, but in one corner of the world, one life had remembered. And that was enough. Asterisk. The shadow beneath the flag, the world outside the embassy had calmed, but inside, currents still moved beneath the surface, subtle and silent, like deep waters. Time had passed since Sergeant Haroun Malik's quiet defiance had echoed across media channels and drawn both admiration and scrutiny. The halls no longer buzzed with tension, and the ceremonial routines resumed, polished and predictable. Yet, beneath the polished floors and manicured diplomacy, something had shifted, not just in perception, but in principle. What had once been a quiet corner of ceremonial duty was now a beacon to those searching for real meaning within a system often dulled by formalities and politics. And whether Haroun wanted it or not, he had become more than just a sentry at the gate. He had become a quiet force pulling others to remember their deeper roles. Ambassador Imani Vos had settled swiftly into her role. Her meetings were precise, her language always respectful, and her decisions balanced. Unlike her predecessor, she understood the importance of listening before acting. And in her first month, she made a series of small but strategic changes. Staff who had grown used to unchecked authority were reassigned or gently retired. Voices that had gone unheard were welcomed back into diplomatic dialogues. And most noticeably, she began requesting briefings from the security wing, not to command them, but to understand them. It was during one of these briefings that she noticed something peculiar in the records, something that didn't quite fit the embassy's otherwise tightly controlled logs. Why is this access badge appearing at odd hours in the records? She asked, pointing to a string of late-night entries tied to a Level 4 clearance security class, typically reserved for senior personnel, or the Crown's direct messengers. This ID was decommissioned a year ago, yet it's still registering. Motioned through the lower archives hall and technical comms wing, the room went quiet. A junior aide adjusted his glasses and coughed nervously. It must be a glitch in the sensors, Ambassador. The ID is non-functional. Then someone is. Either using a ghost badge, Voss said coolly, or manipulating the logs to hide something else. It was then that she requested Sergeant Malik personally report to her for the first time, not as a guard, but as a trusted observer. The meeting was private, held in her office at dusk. The walls were covered with calm-toned paintings of mountain ranges and oceans her way, perhaps of reminding herself that the world was always bigger than the room she stood in. Haroun entered, saluted as required by formality, and waited in respectful silence. "Sergeant," she began, folding her hands atop a sleek glass desk, "I don't mean to disturb your schedule, but I believe you're uniquely positioned to assist me with a quiet matter. It's not a mission, not yet. It's an observation. I trust your eyes more than I trust our security logs." Haroun said nothing at first. He understood when to remain silent, but his expression, focused and waiting, invited her to continue. "There have been unexplained movements in the lower wings, archived wings, usually untouched. I need someone who knows this building better than the blueprints. I need someone not easily noticed and not easily swayed. Would you be willing to assist?" There was no hesitation. Haroun gave a single nod. "If it protects the embassy, I will watch." And so began something unexpected, the quiet surveillance of shadows. No teams, no official reports. Just Haroun, walking routes not recorded by cameras, noting changes not measured by sensors, and observing faces too quickly dismissed by others. It was during one of these late watches, near the corridor that bordered the old document vaults, that he saw a figure move past the restricted area. Haroun stayed still, melting into the curve of the stone wall. The figure moved with precision, not nervous, not reckless. Someone who knew the halls well. But Haroun noticed something unusual. The figure paused at a locked door and held up a card that didn't blink green on the scanner. Yet the door opened anyway. That meant one thing: manual override access, something only possible with Crown-issued technology. He followed, not close enough to be seen, but not so far he'd lose. The trail. The figure entered what should have been a disused records room, an old archive of foreign treaties, long since digitized and boxed for preservation. Haroun waited 5 minutes. Then, with practiced silence, he stepped forward and examined the door. No sign of forced entry. He pressed his ear to the panel. Inside, there was no sound. But he could feel the slight warmth in the handle. Someone had only just left. He turned and walked away, not because he was afraid, but because he knew what kind of trouble came from engaging too soon. Observation first, action later. The next morning, he returned to the same corridor during official hours and filed a quiet query to building maintenance. "Have any of the old records rooms been reactivated for climate control or temporary storage?" The response came a few hours later, simple, clear. No such rooms have been accessed or requisitioned in the last 8 months, which meant the figure had used the room unofficially. And someone else knew how to manipulate access logs. The implications were disturbing. If someone had ghost-level clearance, and if they were accessing rooms off the official record, it meant that internal security had either been compromised or was being bypassed by someone above protocol. And that meant the Queen's embassy was being used for something not declared, and potentially dangerous. Haroun reported this to Ambassador Voss the next evening. She didn't interrupt. She listened to every detail, nodding slowly, her mind already chasing possible conclusions. "I feared as much," she finally said. The Queen has warned us before. Our greatest threats are not foreign armies, Sergeant. They are the quiet betrayals from within. What do you want me to do?" Haroun asked. Voss leaned forward slightly. "I want you to continue observing. I want you to be the stillness that sees everything. And if the moment comes when action is necessary, when truth must rise above diplomacy, I will rely on you. To act, not for me, not for politics, but for the truth this place is meant to protect." Haroun understood. She was not ordering him. She was trusting him. That, to him, was far heavier than any command. The next several nights passed with increasing caution. Haroun noticed patterns. The unknown figure returned twice more. Each time, entering only after midnight, staying no more than 30 minutes, and always leaving without evidence. But Haroun began to see something else: small traces left behind. A smudged print on a nearby light switch, slightly newer dust. On a fire exit door hinge, and once, the smallest shred of torn cloth snagged on a metal cabinet edge. It was dark green like the suits worn by archival staff. He took the cloth to Voss, who had it quietly tested. The lab reported something surprising. Traces of encrypted ink, chemical markers used to hide microtext from the naked eye. The fabric was from a data-cloaking suit, used only in top-level intelligence missions. Now, it was no longer just a matter of unauthorized entry. Someone was extracting information. And hiding it. From within the Queen's own walls. Haroun requested permission to confront the figure if seen again. Voss considered it for a long moment, then nodded. "If you are certain it won't compromise lives. If you are certain they won't destroy what they carry." The next week passed in silence. Then on the 8th night, it happened. Just past 2 in the morning, Haroun saw the same shadowed figure slipping through the corridor. This time, Haroun moved faster, taking an alternate hallway, flanking through the old diplomat's lounge and emerging near the side exit of the records wing. He waited. Footsteps approached, and then the door opened. The figure stepped out and froze. Haroun was standing in front of him. Neither spoke at first. The figure, slender, masked, held something in their hand. A slim case. Haroun raised his voice, just enough to cut the silence. "This place holds the truth of nations. What are you taking from it?" The figure didn't run. Instead, a voice responded. Calm, female, familiar. "I'm taking what was erased," she said. "What your crown chose to forget." Haroun's eyes narrowed. "Show me your face." Slowly, the mask was removed, and Haroun's breath caught in his chest. He knew her. Captain Rima Thorne, a former Royal Intelligence officer, declared dead 4 years ago in a classified operation. Abroad, she had not died. She had gone underground. And now she was inside the embassy, stealing something. "Why?" Haroun asked, his voice low with confusion and betrayal. Rima looked tired, older than he remembered. But her voice still carried the same calm command. "Because some truths, Sergeant, are too dangerous to be left in the hands of those who silence men like you." Then she stepped back, not to run, but to see what Haroun would choose. Duty, or discovery. And Haroun Malik, standing at the edge of shadow and loyalty, faced a decision that would define not only his own legacy, but possibly the integrity of the crown itself. Asterisk. The Forbidden's archive. In the moments following her unmasking, the hallway was thick with silence. Not the calm kind, but a silence that bore weight of history, of betrayal, of choices made in darker hours. Haroun Malik stared at the face of Captain Rima Thorne, a woman once thought lost to the fog of war, now re-emerged as an uninvited ghost in the halls of the very embassy he swore to protect. She stood quietly before him, the case still clutched in her hand, her stance calm but unyielding. There was no fear in her eyes, no panic. That unnerved him more than if she had drawn a weapon. It meant she wasn't here on impulse. This mission, whatever it was, had been planned with intent, precision, and cause. Haroun's training told him to call it in, detain her, secure the case, and await protocol. But there was a deeper thread pulling at him now, an old thread woven through memories of their shared years in service. Rima had once been a rising star in Royal Intelligence, admired for her brilliance and integrity. She had mentored new recruits, led impossible field missions, and once saved an entire diplomatic team from assassination in the outer sectors. Her loyalty had been unquestioned, until she disappeared. "I won't run," she said, interrupting his thoughts. "But I also won't surrender to a system that buried me alive. You're not my enemy, Haroun. You're the only one I hoped might still remember what justice is." "You broke into a sovereign archive," Haroun said, his voice controlled but firm. "You're carrying state-sealed documents, wearing cloaking gear, and bypassing national security systems. That's not how justice is pursued." "No," she replied, lifting the case slowly. "But it's how justice is recovered when it's been denied." With great care, she knelt and placed the case gently on the ground, then straightened and stepped back, hands visible. Haroun didn't lower his guard, but his curiosity wrestled against his sense of duty. He stepped forward, knelt, and opened the case. What he saw inside was not what he expected. No weapons, no diplomatic encryption chips, no stolen access codes. Instead, it was filled with documents, some yellowed with age, others sealed in translucent polymer. Stamped across many of them were the words, "Top secret, for Crown eyes only." But more disturbing than the seals were the contents. Photos, reports, transcripts, all related to an operation Haroun had only ever heard whispers of during his early years, Operation Silent Sun. He knew the name. Most guards did, but only as a rumor, a failed mission involving the disappearance of several planetary envoys and the silencing of a protest uprising on Keras 4. Official records labeled it as a terrorist containment op. But Rima's documents told a very different story. These files, she began, voice steady, detail Crown-sanctioned assassinations of civilians. Not insurgents' families, children, peace advocates. They were labeled extremists because they discovered resource fraud that tied all the way back to the Crown's executive circle. Haroun flipped through one transcript. It was a communication log between a foreign aid worker and a whistleblower inside a royal mining subsidiary. The messages were desperate, terrified. They spoke of cover-ups, executions staged to look like tribal skirmishes, and falsified reports fed to the embassy for years. He looked up, face hard. If this is true, why not bring it through the proper channels? She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "I did, years ago. I compiled every file, presented it through the intelligence board. I trusted the chain of command. And within a week, my name was erased from official rosters, my family put under surveillance, and I was killed in an explosion that never happened. I survived because one analyst leaked my own termination order to me an hour before." "And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "I came to find the last proof. These are the final missing cum logs. They connect the embassy here, this very place, to the directive that initiated the cover-up. The files were never deleted, just buried so deep only a few knew where they remained." Haroun stood still, eyes locked onto her. The weight of what she was saying threatened to collapse the world he had built his loyalty upon. For him, the Crown had always stood for structure, honor, legacy. But if the roots of that structure were poisoned, what then? "You're not wrong to feel torn," Rima continued. "I felt it too. Years of service don't vanish overnight. But you and I both know this. Blind loyalty is not the same as true honor. One obeys blindly. The other dares to speak truth, even when it's dangerous." He took a long breath. "You need to leave this corridor before the internal systems log another breach. I'll need to make it look like I confronted you and you escaped through the emergency stairwell. Take the case and go. You're helping me? She asked, surprised. I'm not helping you, he said. I'm helping the truth survive long enough to be seen. She didn't argue. She nodded, shouldered the case, and with a final glance that carried more gratitude than words could hold, she disappeared into the darkness of the stairwell behind them. Haroun remained. He re-engaged the corridor security manually, tapped into his COM, and filed a partial report. Unauthorized. Presence detected in records wing. No direct confrontation. Possible cloaking interference. Area secured. I will run a full sweep. Technically, it was not a lie. But neither was it the whole truth. He needed time to think, to investigate, to verify. Over the next 3 days, he worked in silence. During shifts, he walked the halls like always, observing without drawing attention. During nights, he reviewed archived files from diplomatic logs, cross-checking dates, comparing notes, pulling fragments from disconnected sources. The more he read, the more the web widened. And disturbingly, several names tied to the false narrative surrounding Operation Silent Sun were still active within Crown Command structures, some even recent visitors to the embassy. When he brought a heavily redacted folder to Ambassador Voss's desk on the 4th evening, he expected shock. Maybe outrage. What he saw instead was quiet affirmation. She closed the folder, sighed, and looked at him not as a subordinate, but as a partner. Was hoping you would see it yourself, she said. You knew? I suspected, but proof changes suspicion into obligation. This, she said, holding the folder gently, means we are now part of something much larger and much riskier. Haroun frowned. What do we do with it? Voss leaned back, her gaze hardening. We prepare. We gather everything. And then we go higher than the Crown's intelligence board. We go to the people who have not yet sold their soul for security. But first we protect Rima, because now that she's been seen, they will come for her. Where do we hide her? Haroun asked. Voss smiled slightly. We don't. We make her disappear again. But this time, on our terms. That night, a quiet extraction was staged. No helicopters, no black vans. Just a private ambassadorial convoy. Meant for an unscheduled cultural inspection at a nearby interstellar port. Haroun drove it himself, eyes scanning every rooftop, every mirror. Rima sat in the back, disguised as an archivist. She said nothing until they neared the checkpoint. When this comes to light, she said quietly, you might be seen as a traitor. Haroun didn't take his eyes off the road. Only by those who fear the truth. And cowards don't get to define my loyalty. They passed through the checkpoint, and just like that, the Crown's most inconvenient survivor was once again a ghost, this time, protected by those still loyal not to politics, but to principle. The trap within the marble. The embassy had always been a place of tradition: marble columns, gilded banisters, and careful routines. But now, the very elegance that once gave the building its majesty seemed to cloak something rotten beneath. After Rima Thorne's quiet extraction and Haroun Malik's growing awareness of the buried truths within the Crown's archives, the embassy halls felt different. There was no explosion, no dramatic fallout, not yet. But something intangible had shifted, like the pressure before a storm. Conversations grew tighter, meetings shorter, and eyes sharper. The security staff began receiving new protocols, curious ones. Unusual scanning orders, randomized clearance audits, and most notably, a reshuffling of guard shifts, especially in corridors near the records wing and ambassadorial quarters. On the surface, it looked like heightened security in response to recent breach alerts. But Haroun knew better. He recognized the pattern. This wasn't tightening, it was probing. They were testing the cracks. Someone inside knew there had been a breach. And now, they were trying to smoke out the leak. Ambassador Voss played her part well. Outwardly, she remained composed and diplomatic, hosting dignitaries, issuing rehearsed statements. and continuing her meetings with military advisors and trade representatives. But every third evening, she met Haroun in a room with no microphones, no surveillance, an old kitchen annex now used as storage. It was there she handed him coded documents, old clearance charts, and back-channel correspondences from trusted allies within the Crown's intelligence network. What was left of it? They were piecing together a picture of systemic rot, covert silencing of internal dissenters, economic cover-ups, even war profiteering. And more troubling, names of officials once assumed loyal were appearing again and again in connection with these scandals, many of whom had stepped foot inside the embassy in the past year. The enemy wasn't outside the walls. It was in the offices next door. On the 5th day after Rima's disappearance, Haroun received a message in his locker. No signature. No markings. Just a folded slip of paper with one sentence written in clean block letters. You saw her. You let her go. He stood for a long time, the paper crumpled in his hand, the weight of it like a stone. They knew someone had seen, perhaps not clearly, not yet, but enough to cast suspicion. Enough to begin the slow process of isolation. That always came before removal. By morning, he was reassigned. Not officially demoted, not reprimanded, just rotated, as they called it. Off ceremonial guard, off diplomatic rotation, placed instead on basement-level transport escort duty. A polite exile. Most wouldn't think anything of it. Haroun played along. He wore the new duty badge, stood by the cargo gates, monitored vendor access, and said nothing. But his mind was sharp, and he saw the patterns tighten further. The embassy's internal oversight division, the kind with broad surveillance authority, began auditing guard communications. Half of Haroun's team were reassigned. 2 guards he trusted disappeared from duty rosters entirely. He checked the hospital logs, checked leave forms. Nothing. They had simply vanished. Then the surveillance began. Not cameras. People. He noticed a new security officer watching him during his shifts, a tall man with pale eyes, new to the embassy. Too clean, too quiet. His uniform was sharp, but his boots were unscuffed. No dust on his cuffs. He wasn't a real guard. He was watching Haroun. And Haroun didn't let it show, but he began watching back. The trap was closing slowly, methodically. Ambassador Voss saw it too. She summoned Haroun late one evening, under the guise of inspecting escort protocols. When the door closed behind them, her tone changed. They're watching you now. I know, Haroun replied calmly. They're building a case, likely fabricated. Maybe old training logs twisted into insubordination claims. Or falsified reports from your shift logs. That's how it starts. Then they intend to remove me, he said. She nodded. Yes, not publicly, quietly, like they tried with Rima. What do they think I'm hiding? They don't. No, she said. And that terrifies them more than if they did. Haroun stood silent for a long moment, then looked her in the eye. Do we still move forward? Voss didn't hesitate. Yes. The information Rima gave us connects 3 sitting council members to false flag operations, and there's more we're uncovering. We can't let them bury it again. That night, Haroun did something he had never done before. He broke protocol. He accessed a restricted channel, an old security relay line used during off-world diplomatic emergencies. Its use was reserved for high-clearance evacuation notices, never monitored by the embassy's internal audit team. And on that line, he sent a single encrypted message to one person, a retired colonel named Haroun Malik, a man Haroun once served under, someone who had vanished from public service after refusing to carry out a planetary suppression order. If anyone still had allies outside the reach of the corrupted core, it was him. The message was short. Proof exists. They're silencing from within. I need a way out before the noose tightens. He received no reply. Not for 2 days. Then, A voice crackled through a private relay at 3:07 a.m. "You always had more spine than most. I have a ship. Dock 7. 3 nights from now. No logos. No questions. But once you're on it, you can't look back." Haroun knew what that meant. If he boarded that ship, he wouldn't be returning to the embassy. He would become what they feared most, a whistleblower outside their reach. But he wasn't running. He wasn't escaping. He was planning something larger. He spent the next 3 days preparing, not just packing files or setting up a personal escape. No, he embedded fragments of the truth across multiple embassy systems, quietly, subtly, using authorized code injections that triggered no alerts. He left digital keys behind, encrypted with names only loyalists would recognize. If he disappeared, others would find the trail. The story would spread. And on the 4th night, wearing a courier's uniform and carrying a classified cargo crate, Haroun passed through the loading bay unchallenged. The pale-eyed watcher was off shift. The security logs had been ghosted for 20 minutes. He walked onto the ship without looking back. By the time the embassy realized he was gone, the truth had already begun to bleed from the walls, through whispers, through data leaks, through unexplainable files surfacing in the hands of foreign reporters. Ambassador Vos was quietly censured by Crown authorities weeks later. She was labeled increasingly unstable and placed on extended leave. But before she was escorted from the embassy, she left one final message in the ambassador's logbook: "When duty becomes a weapon against truth, only those who disobey are truly loyal." Haroun Malik had become more than a guard. He had become a guardian of truth. And though the world would not hear his name for some time, the embers he left behind in that marble prison would one day blaze into a fire the Crown could no longer control. The Crown cannot bleed. The sky above Dock 7 was black, a velvet curtain broken only by the sharp glow of orbital lane beacons and the quiet pulse of waiting cargo haulers. No announcements. No flags, no banners, just iron silence and old steel. The freighter that carried Haroun Malik away from the embassy didn't bear a name, only a designation number sprayed in weathered paint: LX2134. It was a ghost ship, quiet, fast, forgettable. The kind of vessel that was designed not to be remembered. And Haroun, once a royal guard known for unshakable precision and ceremonial discipline, now sat hunched in its dim cargo hold, surrounded by crates and silence. The world he had sworn to protect had branded him a traitor. Yet for the first time in years, he felt closer to true honor than ever before. He was not alone on the freighter. The pilot, a broad-shouldered woman named Kale with calloused hands and sharp eyes, said little. She was one of Colonel Myrick's old contacts, a smuggler, yes, but also a courier of truths too dangerous for sanctioned transport. She handed Haroun a flask and a data slate, nodding toward the rear chamber. "There's a terminal inside," she said. "Encrypted uplink. When you're ready." He was ready. But the truth had to be released the right way. No screaming headlines. Number. Careless exposure. If he dumped everything now, the Crown's disinformation bureaus would descend like vultures, discredit the documents, label them deep fakes, brand him a madman. No, this had to be careful. Surgical, controlled. First, they would plant them. Seed. A series of leaks, each irrefutable. Hard evidence tied to names the public recognized. Then testimonies, Rima's, if she agreed to reveal herself. And lastly, the footage. The files that showed innocent civilians gunned down by agents who wore the Crown symbol on their breastplates. That footage was real. And Haroun had it. Remembered the first time he watched it, hidden in the ambassador's auxiliary viewing chamber. The camera angle had been grainy, but the horror was unmistakable. Soldiers firing into a crowd of unarmed protesters, some of them just children. And over the comms, a voice had whispered, "No witnesses." Directive Silent Sun confirmed. The voice belonged to a man now seated in the Royal High Council. as the freighter moved deeper into unregulated space. Haroun began transmitting fragments of the truth through a trusted list of independent data miners, underground journalism hubs, and exiled academics, people who had once tried to speak up, only to be silenced by political ruin or vanishing acts. He didn't attach his name. Not yet. The truth had to breathe on its own. Within 48 hours, the first embers lit the network. A renowned whistleblower channel uploaded a coded file titled Sunlight Protocol, Truth Behind Keras 4. The file was dissected within hours, its authenticity verified through dozens of forensic analysts. Then came the cum logs, then the envoy transcripts. One by one, the pieces surfaced. And slowly, the public stirred. At first, the Crown ignored it. Their silence was calculated dismissal through indifference. But when the independent networks refused to take the files down, and when the names in the documents began trending across galactic communication platforms, the silence fractured. A Crown spokesperson called the leaks a malicious data smear campaign coordinated by foreign actors. But it was too late. The truth had begun to walk. Back on the freighter, Haroun received a transmission from Ambassador Voss. It was heavily encrypted, hidden behind 6 security walls and buried beneath a trade manifest. Her face flickered into view, tired but composed. "You lit the match," she said, her voice low. "They've started purging files, shredding personnel logs. They've already pinned 2 of the disappearances on internal investigations. Gone wrong, and I've been officially retired. They're covering their tracks, Haroun. We need to move faster." "I know," Haroun replied, "but the people are waking up. The fire's spreading. We need more fuel." "There's one more archive," she said. "Old, off-world, pre-embassy logs. Before the current regime took over, it was never digitized, only microdata format. If we can retrieve it, we prove the corruption started decades earlier," Haroun finished. "Yes, and we prove it was never a mistake. It was engineered." She sent him coordinates. A derelict observatory built into the cliffs of Ralia 5, once used for deep space research before being abandoned by the Crown during a budget cut. It had become a legend among old intelligence officers known as the Hollow Eye. If the final archive still existed, it would be there. And with it, the last nail in the coffin. Kale landed the freighter under cover of a meteor surge. The observatory loomed like a relic from an ancient war, half buried in rock, its entrance sealed behind old clearance tech. Haroun bypassed the locks using ambassadorial clearance overrides, but once inside, he realized something chilling. Someone had been there before. The power was still functional. The doors had been disturbed, and in the dust near the mainframe, fresh footprints led into the dark. They weren't alone. Kale stayed with the ship, ready to lift off at a moment's notice, while Haroun entered the Hollow Eye's inner core. There, among the humming consoles and cracked viewing panels, stood a figure, clad in Crown intelligence black, his face half shrouded beneath a recon hood. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place," the man said, turning. Haroun froze. He knew that voice. Commander Gerald Vane, former head of the Crown's Internal Affairs Bureau, the man responsible for issuing the original Silent Sun directive. "I should kill you," Haroun said. "You should," Vane agreed. "But you won't, because I didn't come here to stop you." "What?" "I came here to die." Vane tossed something toward him, a data crystal. Haroun caught it, confused. "It's all there," Vane said. "The names, the black ledger, the orders, even the false flag documents you haven't uncovered yet." "Why?" Haroun demanded. "Why give me this now?" "Because the Crown is bleeding," Vane said, stepping back toward the console. "And some of us were always just cleaning the knives. But I watched them burn children alive, Malik. I watched them laugh. I stayed silent too long. Let this be my penance." Vane drew a sidearm and pressed it to his chest. "Tell them who I was. Then show them what I gave you." And before Haroun could move, Vane pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the observatory like a last confession. When Haroun returned to the ship, he said nothing to Kale. He handed her the crystal, sat down, and watched as the freighter lifted back into space. It was over. And it was just beginning. The files leaked by Haroun and Vane spread like wildfire. Investigations opened. Mass protests erupted. High Council members resigned, some arrested. Others fled into exile. And while the Crown tried to preserve itself behind layers of diplomacy and silence, the people refused to forget. As for Haroun Malik, his name was never officially mentioned, but everywhere across the stars, graffiti began to appear. On walls, on ships, on banners held high above protesting crowds. A single phrase: "The guard did not bow."